Hey Chevra, thank you for joining us once again for Living with the Times. One of the pivotal moments that undoubtedly helped to define and shape my educational philosophy occurred when I was in college. I was on my way to earning a bachelor's degree with a concentration in psychology when a certain professor began the semester with a statement unequivocally that in this course we are going to be studying the behavior and chemistry of human beings and other animals. I think my initial reaction was probably one of confusion, but gradually developed into a posture towards humanity. The Gemara in Chagiga says that the human being could be compared to an angel in three ways and to an animal in three ways. And although I probably couldn't articulate it at the time, I pretty much decided right then and there that when I would eventually enter into the field of education, I would try to relate to my students and really to all of humanity as being not so much sophisticated animals, but rather as embodied angels, to use the Gemara's terminology. Now, one of the ways that I did that, I started teaching about 15 years ago, is that I made it a point of eating together with my students. Now, eating with high school boys, which was I originally started teaching, is probably not the most intuitive way to get in touch with their more angelic side. But the truth is that some of the deepest and most long-lasting relationships that I have developed not in the classroom, but being human, sitting together and eating together with my students. It's not surprising that the Torah has a formula that kind of identifies the act of eating as a shas milchama, as a time of war, a time of battle between that more angelic and more animalistic side in the human being and the pull in each direction. So sitting together with my students at that moment when they were fighting for their humanity actually drastically changed the way that I was able to facilitate their education. The pasuk says, "Va'achalta v'savata uverachta." This week's parsha, Parshas Eika, "Va'achalta v'savata uverachta." You should eat. It's good to eat. You should be satisfied. Uverachta, and you should bench. You should bless Hashem for the food that you've eaten. Now, if you look at the actual nusach of the brachos of benching, you look at the actual themes that are presented in the benching, you see a remarkable thing. The first bracha was written by Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the bracha during the 40 years when the Jewish people were eating man in the desert. They were eating a non-physical substance, a semi-physical substance, mostly spiritual substance that got swallowed into their limbs and was really somewhat detached from this world. And then moving from Moshe Rabbeinu, you move from that first bracha on the zan, on that food which satiates, which is coming from Shamayim, the man, to Yehoshua, who wrote the second bracha, al haaretz ve'al hamazon, specifically focusing on and pointing out the food that comes from the ground. Yoshua, who entered into Eretz Yisrael and actually had food growing out of the ground, wrote the second bracha. And the third bracha, which is the last of the deoraisa, of the biblical aspect of benching, speaks about the building of the Beis HaMikdash, the rebuilding of Yerushalayim and having a physical house for Hashem. And so what we see quite remarkably is that even though there's a general discussion in philosophy about how the human being should relate to their humanity, to the aspect which is slightly more animalistic in humanity, to be precise, should we be embarrassed of it? Is it something to be celebrated? The Jewish perspective is that we should be somewhat suspect, but also celebrate the fact that human beings are physical. Rav Kook writes in the third parak of Einaya, Shlosha Sha'achlu in Maseches Brachos, which speaks at length about the process of creating a zimun, some sort of collective to say Birkas Hamazon as a group together. Rav Kook writes repeatedly that the fact that in Judaism, lichatchila, our preferred method for eating is to eat in a group, is to say that the human being shouldn't be embarrassed of the fact that they're eating. Eating is something which is a time of war. It's certainly a time when we have to put ourselves on the line to try to figure out who are we really. But when we eat together with people, as opposed to stowing off in the corner and sneaking a little something to eat, what we're saying is we embrace the fact that we're human. And so it's not surprising that the theme of Birkas Hamazon follows this pattern of beginning with the man, which is this more angelic, esoteric, kind of detached aspect of humanity to this world, then moving into Eretz Yisrael, and then moving into a physical space so that Hashem Kiviyachol, who has no physical body and has no physical representation, should have a physical place down here in this world. As if to say that even Hashem is not embarrassed of the fact, but rather embraces and created the world for the specific purpose of creating a space for him down here in the physical world. And so the human being also embraces their physicality and sees physicality not as something that they should run away from, but something that they should learn to use in the proper way. And so Birkas Hamazon, which is really one of the two bookends of the act of eating, helps to shape the entire experience of eating. It teaches us that human beings, ultimately, while sharing something in common with the animal kingdom, are actually really more angelic than we sometimes give them credit for. So Hashem should help us all to know ourselves and to know that we are, yes, it's true that we are animalistic in certain ways and we shouldn't get carried away, but we should also embrace our humanity in a way which is uplifting, and be able to do it with other people, to sit with other people, and to create relationships around our being human beings. Good Shabbos.